Settle in and do not look away. This entire story is a single chilling journey that is best experienced in full. If you appreciate tales of the supernatural, show your support by subscribing. It lets us know you want more. Now, listen closely. He walked forward, step by step, across the bridge. Mara followed. The sound of the creek faded behind them. 30 meters. Daniel stopped. Nothing, he said. Just forest, tall pines, dead leaves covering the ground. He looked down at the map again, then back at the forest, then the map again. Something didn't line up. The road should be right in front of them. Daniel took one more step forward. His foot hit something hard under the leaves. He froze. "What?" Mara asked. Daniel slowly brushed away the layer of leaves with his shoe. Beneath them was dark grey stone. Flat. Smooth. Too smooth. He cleared more leaves. A straight line appeared. Then another. Mara crouched beside him. "Oh my God," she whispered. Stone bricks. Old ones, forming a narrow strip through the forest floor. Daniel slowly stood. The line of bricks continued forward between the trees, barely visible beneath decades of leaves, like a road that had been buried by time. Mara looked up. Her voice was barely audible. "Daniel?" "Yeah?" "This is it?" He followed the faint line deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker, the air colder. Behind them, the bridge was already barely visible. Daniel stopped suddenly. "What?" Mara asked. He pointed ahead. Between the trees stood a wooden post. Old, weathered, half rotted, but still standing. And nailed to it was a crooked wooden sign. Daniel felt his stomach drop as he read the faded letters carved into it. Black Hollow Road. Neither of them moved. The sign leaned slightly to one side, as if the forest had been slowly pushing it over for decades. But the letters were still readable, clear enough to remove any doubt. Black Hollow Road. Daniel spoke first. "This shouldn't exist." Mara stepped closer to the sign. Her fingers hovered near the wood, but didn't touch it. "This road isn't on any official map." Daniel unfolded the yellow map again. The line matched perfectly. Black Hollow Road curved deeper into the forest, toward the center, toward the red circle, toward Second Town. The wind moved softly through the trees. For a moment, Daniel thought he heard something else. A faint sound, very far away, like metal hitting metal, or a distant door closing. He turned. "Did you hear that?" Mara shook her head. "Hear what?" Daniel listened again. Nothing now, just wind. He exhaled slowly. Probably nothing. Mara pointed down the hidden road. So, what now? Daniel looked at the path of old bricks disappearing into the woods. Every instinct in his body told him to turn around, to leave, to pretend none of this existed. But the map in his hands said otherwise. 4 hidden streets, all leading to the same place, and they had just found the first one. Daniel folded the map again. We follow it. Mara hesitated. That road could go miles into the forest. Maybe. Or maybe, she said quietly, it goes somewhere else. Daniel looked at the sign again. The wood creaked softly in the wind. Then he stepped onto the old brick road. Only one way to find out. Mara followed, and together they began walking down Black Hollow Road. Behind them, the wind lifted the loose leaves on the forest floor. For just a moment, something else became visible beneath them. More buried stone. Another road crossing the first one. A road that did not appear on the yellow map at all. Daniel hadn't noticed the second road at first. It was Mara who stopped. Wait. Daniel turned. What? Mara was staring at the ground behind them. The wind had lifted a thick layer of dry leaves, exposing more of the buried stone beneath the forest floor. Not just the narrow brick road they were standing on. Another one. Crossing it, perfectly straight. Daniel walked back slowly. The new line of stone was wider than Black Hollow Road. Much wider. He kicked away more leaves. More bricks appeared. Then more. Soon the shape became clear. A full intersection. 2 roads crossing in the middle of the forest. Daniel felt his pulse begin to rise. This is impossible, he said. Mara shook her head slowly. The map didn't show this one. No, Daniel said. It didn't. He unfolded the yellow map again. Black Hollow Road was there. Old Quarry Lane was there. Red Bridge Path. But this crossing street was not. Daniel looked up. The buried road stretched left and right through the trees, as if an entire neighborhood had once existed here, and then simply vanished. Mara spoke quietly. Maybe the map doesn't show everything. Daniel turned to her. What do you mean? She hesitated. What if the map only shows the roads you're supposed to find? The words settled heavily in the cold air. Daniel looked again at the forest around them. For the first time, he noticed something strange. The trees here were different. Older, taller, and they grew in odd, unnatural gaps. Almost like spaces where buildings had once stood. A faint sound drifted through the woods. A long, metallic creak. Daniel froze. Did you hear that? This time, Mara nodded. Yes. The sound came again. Slow. Rusty. Like a gate being pushed open somewhere far away. Daniel followed the direction of the noise down Black Hollow Road. The path curved deeper into the trees, The forest looked darker there, almost grey, like the colour had drained out of it. Mara stepped closer to him. Daniel? Yeah? What if the town really was here? He swallowed. You mean before Northaven? Mara nodded. Before the map was corrected? Daniel looked down the road again. The deeper they looked, the harder it became to see the end of it. The road seemed to fade into the forest, not because of distance, but because the air itself looked thicker, like fog that wasn't quite fog. Daniel suddenly had the uneasy feeling that the forest ahead of them was watching. Then something else caught his eye, far down the road, between the trees. A shape. He squinted. Mara? What? There's something there. She followed his gaze. At first, she didn't see it. Then she did. A structure, half hidden between tall pines. Square, dark, too straight to be natural. Mara whispered, Is that a house? Daniel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. It looked like a house, but something about it felt wrong. The roof sagged strangely, the windows were black, and the entire building leaned slightly, as if the ground beneath it had shifted long ago. Daniel checked the map again. The road curved toward the center of the red circle, towards Second Town. If the map was right, this was only the beginning. Mara spoke quietly beside him. Daniel? Yeah? Why would a house still be here? He didn't answer, because the question running through his mind was much worse. If a house still stood here, how many others were still out there in the forest? And who had been living in them all this time? The structure looked older the closer they got. At first, Daniel thought it was just another abandoned cabin left from logging days. But as they walked down the buried road, details began to emerge that made his chest tighten. The building wasn't a cabin. It was a house. A real one. 2 stories tall. Wood siding warped by time. The porch sagged slightly to one side, but it hadn't collapsed the way abandoned buildings usually did. It was standing, waiting. Mara slowed as they approached. You see that? She whispered. Daniel nodded. The windows, they weren't broken. They were just dark, as if someone had covered them from the inside. The wind pushed softly through the trees behind them. The forest seemed quieter here. Too quiet. Even the birds were gone. Daniel stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked loudly beneath his weight. Dust rose in the cold air. He glanced back toward the road. Black Hollow Road had already started disappearing behind the trees. Mara climbed the porch steps beside him. You still want to do this? She asked. Daniel looked at the door. The handle was rusted, but something about it looked wrong. There were no spider webs. None. In a place this abandoned, there should have been dozens. Daniel swallowed. Yeah, he said quietly. Then he pushed the door open. The door opened slowly, with a long groan of old wood. Daniel expected the smell first. Mold, rot, decay. But the air inside the house smelled normal. Dry, dusty, but not rotten. Sunlight slipped through thin cracks around the boarded windows, painting pale lines across the floor. Daniel stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under his weight. Mara followed behind him. They both stopped in the middle of the room, furniture still inside. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a small iron stove in the corner, everything covered in dust, but arranged neatly, like the people who lived here had simply stood up and walked away. Daniel ran his hand across the table. The dust layer was thick, but not untouched. There were faint marks across it. Lines, like something had been dragged through the dust recently. Mara noticed it too. "Daniel, I see it." The lines led toward the back of the room, toward a staircase. Daniel's pulse started to climb. "Maybe animals," he said. Mara didn't answer, because the lines in the dust were too straight, too deliberate. They looked like something had been carried up the stairs. Daniel looked up. The staircase disappeared into shadow. For a moment, he thought he heard a faint creak from above. He held his breath. Silence. Mara whispered beside him, "Tell me you heard that." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah." Another creak. This time louder. Above them, a floorboard shifting. Mara's voice dropped to a whisper. "Daniel?" "Yeah?" "We are not alone in this house." Neither of them moved. The house seemed to hold its breath around them. Daniel stared at the staircase. Every instinct told him not to go up there, but another thought pushed through his mind. If someone was upstairs, then this place wasn't abandoned, which meant one thing. Someone was living in Second Town. Mara slowly stepped backward. "We should leave." Daniel nodded. "Yeah." But before they could move toward the door, a loud bang echoed from the second floor. Both of them jumped. Something heavy had fallen or been knocked over. Then came a sound that made Daniel's stomach turn cold. Footsteps, slow, careful, walking across the floor above them. Mara grabbed his arm. "Daniel." "I know." The footsteps stopped, directly above the staircase. Then silence returned. For several seconds, nothing happened. Daniel's heart pounded loudly in his ears. Then something else appeared. A shadow at the top of the stairs. It stretched slowly across the wall behind the staircase railing. Tall, human, standing perfectly still. Mara whispered, barely breathing, "Someone's there." Daniel didn't answer, because the shadow wasn't moving, not even slightly, as if the person upstairs had frozen the moment they realized someone had entered the house. Seconds passed, 10, 20, then the shadow moved, just a little, and a voice drifted down the staircase, quiet, dry, and filled with something Daniel couldn't quite place. Not anger, not fear, something worse. The voice said only 3 words. "You found the map." Daniel felt Mara's grip tighten around his arm. neither of them answered. The shadow at the top of the staircase shifted slightly. The voice came again, calmer this time. You weren't supposed to find that road. A slow step creaked above them. Daniel forced himself to speak. Who's there? Silence. Then another step. A figure finally appeared at the top of the stairs. An old man. Thin. Tall in a way that made his bones seem too long for his body. His grey hair hung unevenly around his face, and his skin looked pale, almost the same colour as the dusty walls behind him. But his eyes were sharp, very sharp, and they were fixed directly on the folded map in Daniel's hand. You shouldn't be holding that, the old man said. Daniel swallowed. You mean the map? The old man slowly began walking down the stairs. Each step creaked loudly in the quiet house. Yes, he said. That map. Mara whispered beside Daniel, we should go. But the old man raised a hand, not threatening, just certain. If you leave now, he said calmly, it will already be too late. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? The old man reached the bottom of the staircase. Up close, he looked even older than Daniel had first thought. Deep lines ran across his face, but there was something strange about him. Something Daniel couldn't immediately explain. The man didn't look surprised to see them. He looked tired, like he had been expecting this moment for years. You saw the circle, the man said. Daniel nodded slowly. Second town. The old man sighed. Yes. Mara stepped forward. Is this it? She asked. The old man glanced around the house. A faint smile appeared. No, he said. This is only the edge. Daniel's stomach tightened. What edge? The old man looked toward the forest outside. The edge of the town they tried to erase. The three of them stood in silence for a moment. The old man studied Daniel carefully. You opened the map recently? Daniel nodded. Last night? The man closed his eyes briefly. Then you still have time. Time for what? Mara asked. The old man ignored the question. Instead, he pointed toward the yellow map in Daniel's hands. That map doesn't show streets, he said. It shows paths. Daniel frowned. What kind of paths? The man looked toward the window, toward the forest. Paths between places that should not touch. Mara exchanged a quick glance with Daniel. That doesn't make sense, she said. The old man chuckled softly. It didn't make sense to the town founders either. Daniel leaned forward slightly. What happened here? The man walked slowly toward the table. His fingers brushed the dust on its surface. Then he spoke. In the 1870s, surveyors came to map this land before the town was built. Daniel remembered the photograph in the library, the men standing around the original map. They built the first roads, the man continued. Black Hollow Road, Quarry Lane, Red Bridge Path. Daniel nodded. We saw those on the map. The man shook his head slowly. No, he said. You saw what remains of them. Mara whispered, What do you mean? The old man looked at them both. His eyes had grown darker now. Because those roads didn't just connect houses. He pointed toward the forest. They connected 2 towns. Daniel felt a cold pressure building in his chest. 2 towns? The old man nodded. One, you know, he tapped the floor. North Haven. Then he slowly pointed deeper into the forest. And one you were never meant to find. Daniel glanced toward the dark trees outside. The second town. The old man's expression didn't change, but his voice lowered. Yes. Daniel felt the room growing colder. Why hide an entire town? He asked. The old man's eyes shifted toward the door, as if he expected something to appear there. Because the people who built the first roads discovered something. Mara folded her arms. What? The old man spoke quietly now. When they finished the map, they noticed new streets appearing on it. Daniel blinked. Appearing? The old man nodded. Roads no one had built. Daniel slowly unfolded the yellow map again. The faded lines, the hidden streets. What kind of roads? He asked. The old man stared directly at the red circle. Roads that led somewhere else. A long silence followed. Daniel spoke carefully. Somewhere else? Where? The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the window and looked out toward the trees. The forest had grown darker since they arrived. The air outside looked heavy, almost grey. Finally, the old man said, The first surveyors followed those roads. Daniel waited. And? The old man's voice dropped to a whisper. They found another town, already here. Mara frowned. That's impossible. The man shook his head slowly. It was already built. Daniel's stomach tightened. How? The old man turned back toward them. That was the question the founders asked too. He paused, then added something that made the room feel suddenly smaller. The worse question was who was living there. Mara whispered, What do you mean? The old man looked toward the forest again, his voice barely audible now. Because the people in the second town weren't surprised to see them. For a long moment, no one spoke. The old man's words seemed to linger in the dusty air of the house. Daniel finally broke the silence. You're saying another town was already here? He said carefully. The old man nodded. And the surveyors found it by accident. Mara crossed her arms. That still doesn't explain why it was erased. The old man gave a tired smile. They didn't erase it. He pointed toward the yellow map. They erased the roads that led to it. Daniel looked down at the map again. Black Hollow Road, Old Quarry Lane, Red Bridge Path. Each one curved toward the red circle, toward Second Town. How many roads were there originally? Daniel asked. The old man didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the map with something close to regret. 12, he said finally. Daniel felt a chill crawl across his shoulders. 12, Mara frowned. But there are only 4 on the map. Yes, the old man nodded slowly. The others were destroyed. Daniel looked toward the forest outside. Destroyed roads, hidden maps, a second town no one talked about. So what happened to the surveyors? He asked. The old man's eyes darkened. Some of them went back. Daniel waited. And the others? Mara asked quietly. The old man looked directly at her. They stayed. Daniel frowned. Stayed where? The old man pointed toward the forest again. In the other town. Mara shook her head. That doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to the town founders either, the old man said. He sat slowly in one of the dusty chairs. The surveyors who returned described streets, houses, even a church. Daniel felt his curiosity rising again. So it was just another settlement? The old man gave a quiet laugh. That's what they thought at first. Mara leaned forward. What changed? The old man looked at Daniel. The people. Daniel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. What about them? The old man's voice lowered. The surveyors said the town looked normal. Daniel waited. But the people living there, he paused, didn't act like they were meeting strangers. Mara frowned. What do you mean? The old man stared at the floor for a moment before answering. They greeted the surveyors by name. Silence filled the room. Daniel's mind raced. That's impossible. The old man shrugged faintly. Not according to the men who came back. Mara whispered. How would they know their names? The old man slowly lifted his eyes. That was the same question the surveyors asked. Daniel leaned closer. And? The old man's answer was quiet. The people of the second town said they had been waiting. The wind outside the house grew stronger. Branches scratched softly against the walls. Daniel rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them. So what happened next? He asked. The old man looked toward the door again. They tried to block the roads. Mara nodded slowly. That's why the streets disappeared from the maps? Yes. Daniel looked at the old bricks of Black Hollow Road outside. But the roads are still here. The old man gave a faint smile. Stone is harder to erase than paper. Mara frowned. If the finders blocked the roads, why are people still disappearing? The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood slowly. Then he walked toward the door and pushed it open. Cold forest air spilled into the room. Daniel and Mara followed him onto the porch. The forest looked darker now. The light between the trees had dimmed, almost like dusk had arrived too early. The old man pointed down the hidden road. You asked why people disappear. Daniel nodded. Yes. The old man's voice became very quiet. Because sometimes, he paused, the other town comes looking. Mara's eyes widened. What does that mean? The old man looked directly at Daniel. You opened the map last night. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. The old man's expression turned grim. Then they know you exist now. Daniel felt his pulse spike. Who? The old man pointed into the deep forest. The road continued between the trees, disappearing into grey shadow. The people who are waiting. Daniel stared into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing, just trees. Then his heart stopped. Because far down the road, between the pines, he saw movement, figures standing perfectly still, watching them from the forest. And there were more than one. Daniel didn't breathe. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The forest light had faded, turning everything grey and flat between the trees. But the shapes were still there. Tall, human, standing perfectly still along the road. Mara stepped closer to him. Daniel, what are you looking at? He pointed slowly. Down the road. Mara squinted into the distance. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. Oh my God. The figures were barely visible between the pines, too far away to see clearly. But there were several of them, standing in a loose line along the buried road, watching, not moving. Daniel felt the old man step beside him on the porch. They came faster this time, the old man murmured. Daniel turned sharply. You knew they would come? The old man didn't look surprised. They always do. Mara looked between them. Who are they? The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the shapes in the forest. They're curious, he said quietly. About what? Daniel asked. About you. Daniel's chest tightened. Why? The old man finally looked at him. Because you opened the map. The figures in the forest hadn't moved, but somehow they looked closer now. Daniel wasn't sure if they had actually stepped forward, or if the growing darkness was just making them easier to see. Mara whispered beside him. We should leave. Daniel nodded immediately. Yes. The old man didn't argue. That would be wise. They stepped down from the porch. The buried bricks of Black Hollow Road were barely visible now beneath the shifting leaves. Daniel kept glancing toward the shapes between the trees. They still hadn't moved, but something about them felt wrong. Their posture, too straight, too rigid, like mannequins placed along the road. Mara grabbed Daniel's sleeve suddenly. Wait. He froze. What? She pointed toward the nearest figure. Look. Daniel squinted, and then he saw it. The figure had changed, just slightly. Its head was tilted now, tilted at an unnatural angle, studying them. Daniel's heart began pounding harder. They're getting closer, Mara whispered. The old man spoke quietly behind them. They don't like when people leave too quickly. Daniel turned. What does that mean? The old man's eyes stayed fixed on the forest. It means they prefer when visitors come to them. A faint crunch echoed from somewhere ahead. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound. Leaves shifting, Footsteps. One of the figures had moved. Just one step, but it was enough. Daniel grabbed Mara's arm. "Go." They began walking quickly down the buried road. Not running. Not yet. The old man followed beside them. Behind them, the forest remained silent. Daniel didn't look back. He didn't want to see if the figures were following. But after several seconds, Mara whispered something that made his stomach drop. "Daniel." "What?" "They're walking." He forced himself to glance over his shoulder. The figures had stepped onto the road now, several of them, moving slowly between the trees, not rushing, not chasing, just walking, but they were definitely coming closer. Daniel's voice tightened. Faster. The bridge over Miller's Creek had to be less than half a mile away. If they reached it, maybe whatever was happening here would stop. But the forest ahead had grown darker. The light between the trees was fading unnaturally fast. Daniel unfolded the map again while walking. The red circle marking Second Town had changed. The ink had spread slightly outward, like a stain slowly growing across the paper. Mara noticed it too. "Daniel, the circle." "I know." The old man glanced at the map. "They're expanding it." Daniel stared at him. "What does that mean?" The old man's voice was grim. "It means the boundary is moving." Daniel felt cold fear climb up his spine. "You mean the Second Town is growing?" The old man nodded slowly. "Yes." Behind them, the footsteps were louder now. More of them. Daniel looked back one more time. The figures were closer than before, close enough now that he could see their faces, or rather, their lack of expression. Blank, still, watching. And then one of them spoke. Its voice drifted through the trees, soft, almost polite. "Daniel Carter." Daniel froze. His blood turned cold, because he had never told them his name. And the voice continued, "We've been waiting for you." Daniel stopped walking, not because he wanted to, because his body simply refused to move. The voice behind them had spoken clearly. His name. "Daniel Carter." The sound carried easily through the darkening forest. Mara grabbed his arm. "Don't stop." Daniel forced himself to move again, step after step along the buried road. But his mind was racing. "How do they know my name?" he whispered. The old man answered quietly. "They always know." "That doesn't explain anything." "It does," the old man said. Daniel looked at him. "They knew the surveyors' names too." Mara glanced nervously over her shoulder. The figures were still walking, slowly, patiently. There were more of them now. Daniel was certain of it. He had counted 5 earlier. Now he could see at least 8 moving between the trees. Their steps were perfectly steady, not hurried, not aggressive, like people taking an evening walk through their own neighborhood. The bridge had to be close. Daniel could hear the faint sound of Miller's Creek somewhere ahead. But something felt wrong. The forest around them didn't look the same anymore. The trees were thicker. The road seemed longer. Daniel checked the map again. His stomach dropped. The red circle had grown, much larger now. The edge of it was spreading along Black Hollow Road, following them. "They're moving the boundary," the old man said quietly. Daniel felt panic rising. "You said the bridge was the edge." "It was." Daniel stopped again. "What do you mean, was?" The old man pointed ahead. Daniel looked up.
The forest opened slightly, and the sound of water grew louder. Miller's Creek. The bridge appeared through the trees, but Daniel immediately realized something was wrong. The bridge looked farther away than it should have been. Much farther, almost like the road had stretched. Mara whispered beside him, "That wasn't that far before." Daniel shook his head. "No." The old man's voice was grim. "The town is pulling you back." The footsteps behind them grew louder, leaves crunching, branches snapping softly under steady movement. Daniel risked another glance back. The figures were closer now, much closer, close enough to see their faces clearly, and something about them made his skin crawl. They looked normal, ordinary people. A woman in a dark coat, a tall man with his hands folded calmly in front of him, another figure that looked like a teenage boy. But their expressions were wrong. Too calm, too patient, as if they already knew how this would end. The woman stepped slightly ahead of the others. She spoke again. "Daniel Carter." Her voice was gentle, almost friendly. "You don't need to run." Daniel kept walking, faster now. The creek sounded closer, but the bridge still seemed too far away. Mara whispered urgently, "Daniel, they're gaining on us." "I know." The woman's voice came again. "We only want to talk." The old man muttered under his breath. "That's how they start." Daniel looked at him. "What happens if they reach us?" The old man didn't answer. He didn't need to, because at that moment something appeared through the trees ahead. A shape. Daniel slowed. Another house, standing beside the road. Then another, and another. His heart began hammering harder. What? The forest had opened, the buried brick road widened, and suddenly the trees ended. Daniel stopped completely. They were standing at the edge of a street, a real one. Old houses lined both sides of the road, windows, porches, street lamps, everything coated in the grey dust of time. But the buildings were intact, standing quietly in rows. Daniel's voice came out barely above a whisper. "This wasn't here before." The old man spoke softly. "Yes, it was." Mara turned slowly in place. The forest had disappeared behind them. Only the street remained now, stretching deeper into the hidden town. Daniel's chest tightened. "We crossed the boundary." The old man nodded. "Yes." Daniel felt dread spread through him. "But we were walking toward the bridge." The old man looked down the long street of silent houses. His answer came quietly. The road changed. The footsteps behind them stopped. Daniel turned slowly. The figures from the forest had reached the edge of the street. Now he could see them clearly. 10 of them, standing calmly across the road. The woman stepped forward. Her smile was small, polite. "Welcome," she said, "to the second town." Daniel gripped the map tightly. "You moved the road." The woman tilted her head slightly. "Not exactly." She pointed toward the map in his hands. "You opened the path." Mara whispered beside him, "Daniel." But Daniel was staring at the houses lining the street. One by one, lights were beginning to turn on behind the windows, soft yellow glows appearing in the dark buildings, doors opening slowly, more figures stepping out onto porches, watching, waiting. Daniel realized something terrifying. This wasn't an abandoned town.
It was a full one, and everyone in it had been waiting for him to arrive. The woman stepped one pace closer. Her voice was calm. "Don't worry." Daniel felt cold fear rising in his chest. About what? Her smile widened slightly. "You won't need the map anymore." Daniel tightened his grip on the paper. "Why not?" The woman gestured gently toward the street, stretching deeper into the town. "Because now," she said, "you live here." "No." The word came out of Daniel before he even realized he had spoken. The woman's smile didn't disappear, but something in her eyes changed slightly. Not anger, more like quiet curiosity. Daniel tightened his grip on the yellow map. "We're leaving," he said. For a moment, no one on the street moved. The people standing on porches continued watching silently. Dozens of them now. Men, women, children, all perfectly still. The woman folded her hands calmly in front of her. "That's not how it works," she said softly. Daniel stepped backward. The old man beside him whispered, "Don't let them surround us." Mara turned slowly. More figures were appearing behind them, standing in the middle of the street, blocking the direction they had come from. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. "You said the boundary moved," he whispered to the old man. "Yes." "Then it can move again." The old man looked at the map, then at Daniel. "Only if the map closes the road." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" The old man nodded toward the paper. "Fold it." Daniel didn't understand, but he didn't argue. He folded the yellow map once. Nothing happened. The woman on the street watched calmly. Daniel folded it again. The paper suddenly felt colder in his hands. A faint sound moved through the air, like distant wind rushing through empty buildings. Several of the people on the porches turned their heads slightly, watching the map now. Daniel looked at the old man. "Is it working?" The old man nodded slowly. "Keep folding." Daniel folded the map again. This time the ground beneath them trembled slightly. The street lamps flickered. The woman's calm smile faded. "That won't stop it," she said. Daniel ignored her. Another fold. The sound grew louder, like stone grinding deep beneath the street. The houses along the road began to shift slightly, their outlines growing blurry. Mara grabbed Daniel's arm. "Look." The end of the street had changed. The houses there were fading. Beyond them, Daniel could see trees again. The forest. Miller's Creek. The bridge. The woman stepped forward quickly now. "Stop folding the map." Daniel took another step backward. "Why?" For the first time, her voice sharpened. "Because you opened the road." Daniel folded the map again. The tremor beneath their feet grew stronger. The old man spoke urgently now. "Last fold." Daniel stared at the paper. "What happens then?" The old man's voice was grim. "The path closes." Daniel hesitated. "And the town?" The old man didn't answer, but the woman did. Her voice was suddenly cold. "If you close it," she said, "you will never find this place again." Daniel looked down the long street of silent houses, the watching faces, the glowing windows. Then He made the final fold. The world lurched. A deep cracking sound split the air. The houses began collapsing into shadow, not falling, not breaking, just disappearing, like images erased from a page. The people in the street started moving, not running, but walking toward them quickly now. The woman's voice echoed across the fading street. "You don't understand what you're doing." Daniel grabbed Mara's hand. "Run!" The forest ahead was growing clearer. The bridge over Miller's Creek appeared fully again. They sprinted down the shifting road. Behind them, the town dissolved piece by piece, windows blinking out, porches fading into darkness. The footsteps behind them stopped suddenly. Daniel glanced back once. The woman stood at the edge of the dissolving street, her face no longer smiling, just watching him. And before the last piece of the town vanished, she said one final thing, her voice quiet, but perfectly clear. "You'll open the map again." Daniel crossed the bridge seconds later. The moment his feet touched the other side, everything stopped. The forest returned to normal. The road behind them was gone, just trees, leaves, and empty ground. Daniel bent forward, breathing hard. Mara stared into the forest. "It's gone." The old man nodded slowly. "For now." Daniel looked down at the map in his hands. It was completely blank. No roads, no circle, nothing. Just old yellow paper. Daniel exhaled slowly. "It's over." The old man didn't answer. Instead, he looked back toward the trees and spoke quietly. "No." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" The old man pointed at the bottom corner of the paper. Daniel looked. At first, he saw nothing. Then, faint lines began appearing on the blank map. Slowly, as if being drawn by an invisible hand. Daniel's blood ran cold, because the first street that appeared was Black Hollow Road again. 3 nights later, Daniel Carter woke up at 3:17 a.m. He didn't know why. For a moment, he simply lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling of his bedroom in North Haven, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Everything was normal. The forest outside his window was silent, no wind, no distant traffic, nothing. But something felt wrong. Then he heard it, a faint sound from the kitchen, paper moving. Daniel slowly sat up. The house was dark, but a pale gray light from the moon filtered down the hallway. He stepped out of bed. The wooden floor felt cold beneath his feet as he walked toward the kitchen. The sound came again, a soft, scraping noise, like papers sliding slowly across a table. Daniel stopped in the doorway. The kitchen light was off, but the moonlight from the window fell directly across the table, and on that table lay the map. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had folded the map completely. He remembered placing it in a drawer, but now it was open, spread flat across the table, and it was moving, slowly. The paper twitched slightly, like something underneath it was shifting. Daniel stepped closer. The yellow surface of the map was no longer blank. Thin gray lines were appearing across it, not all at once, slowly, carefully, as if an invisible hand were drawing them. Daniel leaned over the table. The first line was already complete. He didn't need to read the name, he knew it. Black Hollow Road. The second line began forming beneath it, a street Daniel had never seen before. The letters slowly scratched themselves into the paper. Daniel felt cold dread crawl up his spine as the name finished writing itself. Carter Lane. His breath caught. Carter, his name. Daniel stepped backward.
The chair behind him scraped loudly across the floor. The map stopped moving. For a moment, everything was still. Then another sound came from outside. Daniel turned slowly toward the kitchen window. At first, he saw nothing, just the dark outline of trees behind his house. Then the light appeared, a faint yellow glow deep in the forest. Another light appeared beside it, then another, and another. Daniel felt his stomach drop, because the lights weren't random. They were arranged in a line, like street lamps turning on one by one in the darkness. A road that hadn't been there before, and somewhere far in the trees, Daniel thought he could see shapes moving slowly between the lights, standing, watching, waiting. Behind him, the map made another soft scratching sound. Daniel didn't want to look, but he did. Another street had appeared. The letters were still writing themselves when he saw them. Second town, new boundary.
Daniel's hands began to shake, and beneath the new line, one final sentence slowly formed across the bottom of the map. A message, written in thin, careful letters. Welcome home. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. The darkness still hides many secrets, and more mysterious tales are yet to come. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't get lost in the shadows and will be the first to hear them.